get out. He shouted, get out of the house.
You couldn't get out through that window. If you're in that bathroom, you can't get out through that window. It's a little fan light.
No, it's a side window.
No, that's the big bathroom, but in the lavatory.
No, not in the lavatory, but in the...
So how was he going to get out of the lavatory?
No, it was not at that time when he shouted. He did not know that the person was in the toilet. He knew that the person was in the bathroom. And that's a big window.
That's a big window.
Yes, that's a big window.
Then you could calm down the
Yes,
window.
of course, and that's what he was shouting, get out.
But he didn't say, get out or I'll shoot you.
No. He said, get out of the house.
He never says, I'll shoot you.
No, of course not.
Why doesn't he say that? Isn't that a warning? Isn't that a natural warning to an intruder if you're now not going to shoot?
Yes, if you look back with hindsight and perfect sight and vision, but Justice Lamont, if I may say, we can't think away certain factors that I will come to.
What
when we
burglar would
criticize
slam the door, Mr. Roux? What burglar would come in and go into the bathroom and into the lavatory and slam the door?
Maybe when you heard the noise?
No, but he went in there and slammed the door.
It's maybe to hide. I don't know.
But what burglar would do that?
Some burglars will come and kill you, some will try and hide, some will run away.
He's putting himself into prison if he goes into that room. Any burglar who goes in that room who was outside will know that you can't escape through that window.
I can tell you that many
cases.
cases...
And he slams the door, drawing attention to the fact that he's gone in there.
Because he's in a hurry, he's been detected. In the mind of the accused, he's been detected. Someone is now aware in this house is coming. That would be in the mind of the respondent. I've had many cases where the burglar did not escape when he could, when he was hiding behind something or simply lying down.
But
you get many different...
Slam the door, Mr. Roux. Let's just go back to that issue.
Did he?
Slam the door issue.
Yes.
He wouldn't slam the door.
In his mind, we have to look at it through the eyes of the accused.
But we have to test what he says. We have to test what he says against an objective fact.
But that's a factual finding, and if it's rejected now on a sentence...
It wasn't rejected.
No, it was not rejected.
Correct.
So that's a factual finding that what he heard was the slamming of the door.
Yes.
And that he interpreted to be that someone in the bathroom. And his mind was an intruder. That was his mindset. But I submit that we have to take it back one step and to see who is going to the bathroom. Because my reading is, and I don't believe that's wrong, of the Malgas decision and the Velakasi's decision, is not that you have this magic grounds for compelling and substantial circumstances. It is wide, and it leaves it to a discretion on the court. And what it in fact says, if I may refer to the trial court's judgment with reference to Velakasi and to Malgas, it says, and she quotes that, it says, you take every factor into an account, not just what is more special. You look at everything, and there is residual discretion to decline to pass the sentence was given to the courts and ordered in recognition of the easily foreseeable injustices which could result from obliging them to pass the sentence. And in Velakasi it says, it consists of all factors relevant to the nature and seriousness of the criminal act itself, as well as all the relevant personal and other circumstances. And it goes on, it says, the more a court feels uneasy about an imposition of a prescribed sentence, the greater its anxiety will be that it may be perpetrating an injustice, and that once that uneasiness becomes a conviction, then an injustice will be done. And that is what the trial court did. The trial court said, let's look at this case. And the trial court was absolutely aware of the finding and the relevance of substantial and compelling circumstances. It is not that she was unaware of that. She then goes and she analyzes. And she says, and it's a holistic approach to a judgment.
But Mr. Roux, let's just stick to the point that you were arguing. And we were dealing with the question of regret and remorse.
Yes.
And the principle laid down in Matiti is that in order for there to be sincere remorse, there must be an acceptable explanation.
Well,
that is the principle. And in this case, we do not have an acceptable explanation.
With respect, in the sentence context, I think we have with respect. And may I deal with the remorse element? because it's not one single factor. It's composite. What does the accused explain? What did he explain? He explained that it's something that precipitated the shooting.
But Mr. Roux, I don't understand that point. This court clearly said that we don't know why he shot. And in the light of that, when the matter goes back for sentencing at a high court, the accused decided not to testify, despite the finding of this court.
Justice Sariti, that finding, and the way we read it, followed when he fired the actual shots. It is not what precipitated the shots. Up to there,
No, but that is the point. Why shooting 4 times into a small toilet cubicle where there is no way out?
Justice Mayer,
Why imposing the death sentence to who he believed was an intruder?
Can I ask a question in another way? I'm sorry. We now know that the respondent gave different versions, yes, with which the court was not happy. Now, when you look at the judgment, paragraph 17, have a look at it.
Is it the trial court's judgment?
There's SCA judgment.
This one. Paragraph?
17.
17.
17. It's at page 3649. In what? Volume 21 of 23. Can I read it aloud?
Yes.
With ample justification, the court found the accused had been a very poor witness. His version varied substantially. At the outset, he stated that he had fired 4 shots. The 4 shots, in quote, before I knew it. And at the time when he was not sure of if there was somebody in the toilet. This soon changed to a version that he had fired as he believed that whoever was in the toilet was going to come out to attack him. He later changed this to say that he had never intended to shoot at all, that he had not fired at the door on purpose, and he had not wanted to shoot at any intruder coming out of the toilet. In the light of these contradictions, one really does not know what his explanation is for having fired the 50 shots, an issue to which I shall revert in due course. There were other inherent improbabilities in version, some of which were mentioned by the trial court. Now, that tells us that his version was not accepted. Now, why should you have recourse to that? Because another court rejected his version. Whichever version you put across, the court rejected it.
Yes. All I'm submitting, Justice Sariti, is this, that I'm bound by that action of shooting. There was a vacillation. I'm dealing with the facts immediately before it because you can't think that away. And that's what I wanted to deal with in the context of the remorse. When it came to the context of the remorse, it is true that he vacillated in the action of the shooting. Why did he shoot? He gave different versions. But we know there's something preceding that. And that was never in dispute. Where he said that, and for purpose of remorse I'm going to explain it, that his actions was directed against an intruder, and when he heard that noise, that's when we don't know, he thought the person was coming out. I can only take it to there, because the rest I'm bound to. What did he then do to show if this person was satisfied with his conduct, and was it mere regret, or was it absolutely remorse? We have to look at the surrounding circumstances. And in his mind, and we know what we're dealing with, at the end, it is the deceased Mstienko. And his mind, when he realized that, he was beside himself. That's not regret. That's far more than that. And he wanted them to help. And that evidence is given by objective state witnesses. Dr. Stipp. We take it a step further. He said it to Ms. Viljoen as well. But we take it a step further. Ms. van Schalkwijk was appointed at the bail application because of the condition of the accused or respondent at the time. She says his whole concern was the deceased and the family. It was not about himself. That's confirmed by Dr. Hartzenberg. She says that was his focus, the deceased and their family. Before the trial, he tried to make contact. Understandably, they would not want to do that. During the trial, he tried to make contact. Understandably, it was in the process. After the trial, he tried to make contact. Understandably, they were not ready for it. But if you look at it composite, and you take it together, that's not mere regret with respect. That would be very unfair to say you don't have remorse for what you've done. All I'm trying to say, it is difficult for the accused or the respondent to think himself out of the box and find himself in a situation where he's blamed that he wanted to kill Ms. Steenkamp because he did not, he protested it.
Now, Mr. Roux, let us accept that he believed there was an intruder. The point which I have put to you is, why shooting 4 shots at the intruder through the door?
Now, if I may answer that question.
Yes.
We have to look at it to see who the accused is as a person. And we know certain things about him. We know that he has a serious disability. We know that evening he was not on his prosthetic legs. We know it was 3 o'clock in the morning. We know from all the experts that that disability over many years has a slow burn effect. They call it pervasive. We know as a child that his upbringing was to be overconscious and sensitive of crime. We know that he had a massive fear for crime. We know that he knew that when he was without his legs on, that he was absolutely vulnerable. And we know from Professor Foster, all of these are not in dispute. We know from Professor Foster's evidence that this man, in addition, has an anxiety disorder.
But
So,
Mr. Roux, in all that, I think there is all this that you are mentioning, they are mentioned in the record. In all those things, the question still is, why fire more than one shot? Not only fire one more shot, he has a very lethal weapon with him. It
Yes.
wasn't just a gun. So the question is why?
yes,
That's the question.
I cannot stand here in view of the conviction and justify the 4 shots. What I'm trying to do is to explain the state of mind and say, look at that person. Maybe if I'm able-bodied and I don't suffer from anxiety, disorder, not normal, and I get there, I would be far more calculated and think better. But that person, in that situation, 3 o'clock in the morning, did not. He was just firing. It was not firing with that evil intent. It was his reaction as a result of who he was, of something that he had no control over. It's not a person standing there with confidence that feels that he can protect himself, that feels that he can run away. It's very different. And when we ask that question, why? I'm not, with respect, justifying the 4 shots. That I cannot do. And that was the reason for the conviction. But I'm trying to say, see it in its proper context, who the shots were coming from. Was it coming from this person that has so much confidence, so much reason to have confidence, so much ability to do something else, and it was not?
Would you allow me to ask you the converse of this debate? And I want to assume that Oster reasons logically like any other person. He is sleeping, it's in the wee hours of the morning, he hears a noise in the bathroom, he knows that he is disabled, and naturally he gets scared. And he wants to find out what's happening. But in his mind, he's convinced it's an intruder. Let's forget about whether he knew it was River or anybody. He knows there's an intruder. And he knows his life is at stake. He can't run away. He's got a firearm, he shoots at an intruder who is a potential danger to him, but he says, I didn't intend to kill. Now, when you look at the little kid, why would he shoot in that situation? I thought to say, I was in a desperate situation. I knew if this man comes in, I would not be able to run away from him. But not to stand here and decide I do not intend to kill.
Yes,
This is not just, it's not an ordinary firearm, we're told.
Justice Bossiello, maybe just in the first part of your question, if I may refer you to Dr. Derman's evidence, that was also not disputed. And that is, what you get, especially in persons with that disability, that they have an enhanced or an exaggerated fight response because they don't have a flight response. And they tend to go to the danger. And the accused, when he was asked, why did you go, he couldn't explain it because he wouldn't know. about that exaggerated startle and fight response.
But doesn't that tally with what I'm saying? Instead of the flight response, he had the fire response. Because if I don't fire now, this man might come out and kill me. But he says, I didn't intend to kill.
Yes.
I did not intend to kill this intruder.
But what he
It doesn't make
says
sense to me.
his first was to put himself between him and the intruder, to put himself between the intruder and Ms. Steenkamp, because he believed she was in the
That I
bedroom.
understand, yes, I understand that.
So what he did is going there was, in the first place, protection. Otherwise, if he just wanted to shoot, the shouting does not make sense. The pause, the standing there, does not make sense. There was more to that. So it was not an evil intent right from the beginning. And he was wrong. I'm not trying, he was wrong in firing the 4 shots. Whatever submission I make, he should not, and that was the finding. The question is very different. Can you just take
Well,
the 4
with
shots?
respect to you, I don't accept there's some version that the moment he woke up, he had made a arrangement to shoot. I don't think that's how
Yes.
it happened.
Thank
I don't want to look at it like an armchair critic. Whereas I think then,
I understand that. That's why I'm thank you, Justice Boselo. So the submission that I make, for purposes of sentence, he's been convicted. That's what it is. But for purpose of sentence, we cannot isolate. And the 4 shots are wrong. The 4 shots are wrong. But it cannot be isolated from the circumstances surrounding that. Who that person was and what circumstances at 3 o'clock in the morning.
But this
And no-
precise argument, Mr. Roux, was already rejected by this court within the context of the conviction.
Yes, that argument
The
about
fact
the
that he
shots.
may well have fired without thinking of the consequences because of his disability and the like was absolutely in paragraphs 48 and 49 of this court's judgment rejected.
Yes, but the submission that we make, Justice made in the heads, because it was said, and correctly in the context of conviction, that if you look at his conduct, it cannot be rational. It was irrational conduct. We accept the irrational conduct. But when we come to sentencing, that finding of irrational conduct is not a guillotine that would cut out and destroy all mitigation and extenuation. That can never be so. Then you have to look at why was there irrational conduct? And that cannot be ignored. And there was irrational conduct that was explained. You sit with a person that's not like me.
No, but we don't have an answer for the irrational conduct.
But
We
you have,
don't have an answer for that.
but you have for purposes of sentence.
What
Justice.
is the answer to that?
The answer is, if you look at that person, and again the last part of firing, was it fear, what did it mean? I don't have the answer.
That last part is the critical part, Mr. Roux.
It's not the end, it is one part.
Yes, but it is the critical part.
It is an important part, but I don't believe it's critical with respect. You have to... You
To
can't-
shoot 4 shots into, are you suggesting, to shoot 4 shots into that small little cubicle where there is no way out is not critical?
It is, of course, critical for conviction. It's critical as a factor to take into account of sentence, but it's not so critical that you draw a line through all the other aspects and you ignore the person and you ignore the circumstances of the
Once
person.
on that point, you say it's critical for purposes of marriage. It must also be critical for purposes of sentence.
Yes.
Because he's been sentenced for doing exactly that.
Yes, that is of course an important factor, and I'm not debating that, Justice Sariti. But what I'm saying is it's so critical, and to use those words, that it would just delete and destroy all the other factors. And our submission is it cannot be. You have to look at that person who fired those 4 shots incorrectly, to be blamed and whatever. But who was that person and how did this come about? Would it have happened if that person did not suffer from all these disabilities and the slow burn effect? And that's what we submit to you. You have to look at it in the context of that. It's a very different person that we generally see. It's a person there whose control, whose understanding is seriously compromised, whose fear is seriously compromised, rightly or wrongly.
Mr. Roux, would it be fair to say that issue has not been exhausted? We've asked you all sorts of questions. Don't you want to leave it to us to see how we deal with it in a judgment? I think we've all taken note of it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last
I
part.
think this issue has been adequately debated.
Yes.
We can't take it any further than that. We've asked all of us, all questions of that. You know what our thinking is. But let's deal with it in the judgment. Are you comfortable with that? You can address
Yes,
other
of
issues.
course, of course. I'm satisfied that it's before the court.
You can address any other issues.
But that takes it in a step further. And that is when the court, our quo, considered the compelling and substantial circumstances. Of course, she considered the heavy caliber, the 4 shots, the small toilet. But she says that it's more than that. I also have to look at this person. I have to look at his situation. They all qualify in terms of Malchus and Vilikazi. They all qualify for substantial circumstances. And in her mind, a 15-year sentence, which is for murder, would not make sense. It would not, on the facts before her, be equitable. She experienced what firsthand was going on there. She could see the emotions on all sides. She could see the pain on all sides. She could see the pressure on all sides. She could see the perceptions and the true facts. And she says, in that whole context, when I look at it, how can I impose a 15-year sentence where I get another person walking, he finds someone in his house and he shoot him 4 times. A normal, exactly the same sentence. It would not make sense that you give a sentence of 15 years, which is the minimum prescribed, to a person who fired a shot, he sees someone and he fires a shot in his house. In the day. And he shot him 4 times. In the toilet, wherever. As opposed to this person with the background that I don't want to repeat. As opposed to that, and it doesn't make sense. How can it be the same? How can they receive the same sentence? And that is where the court quoted the trial court. And she says, I refer to Vilikazi, and I refer to Malchus, and she refers to those parts where she says, when you as the trial court, in the exercise of your discretion, look at that, and it doesn't make sense to you, that where you feel it's an injustice, and she quoted those cases, and then what she did, she says, these are the circumstances, this is what I found, and it's clear from that in that she built in not only the aggravating, not only the 4 shots, not only the small cubicle, but also the person and the situation that evening. She brings it all together, and she says, therefore, because of what I've listed above, I find that there are compelling and substantial circumstances. She says, but it doesn't stop there. I also have to look further at aggravation, at mitigation. I have to look at the person before me, and then she carries on. And what she did not do, she was unfairly criticized to say, you just looked at rehabilitation. She did not. She says, I hear you about the rehabilitation, but it's not dominant. I must look at all factors. I must look at deterrence. I must look at retribution. And she did. She says that. There is, if you go through a judgment with respect, excuse me.
Can I read to you what the judgment says, Mr. Roux, and tell me if it accords with what you're saying to us? This, in my view, is an indication that the accused is a good candidate for rehabilitation, and that the other purpose of punishment, although important, ought not to play a dominant role in the sentencing process. Is that what our law says?
Yes, but it goes further than that.
No.
Yes,
that's
what
I'm
she
referring
says.
to this paragraph. Let's
Yes.
just deal with this paragraph which deals with the rehabilitation. Sorry.
She says,
Just hold
The
on.
question
Hold on.
is that the law?
Hold on. Is that what our law says?
I think that if you look at all the facts, the law may say, and I think the law tells us that you must balance all those aspects.
Isn't that what State Zing says? In the old case, he says that to us.
And I think that what she was saying, or not to play, she says dominant, she says I must balance them all. If you go to the top of 4023, she says the other purposes, mainly retribution, deterrence, are just as important and ought to be properly addressed. So if it comes across at the bottom that she's trying to water it down, she does not. It must be read with the top part. She tries to say that they're all as important. She doesn't want to give preference to the one or the other. And that's what she repeats again. And she says, what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to make the others more dominant That should not be
With the
called
greatest of respect, Advocate Roux, my reading and understanding of this paragraph is totally different from yours.
Well-
It clearly says that, that the other purpose of punishment, although important, ought not to play a dominant role in the sentencing process.
Yes. What
In other words, the other purpose of sentence must take the back seat, and rehabilitation must take the front seat.
No, how I read it, Justice Sweetie, and I again have to take up to the top part. I think what she was trying to say is that they must be considered equally. She says that.
But how can they be equal when someone's dominant?
No, she says I must not, ought not to play a dominant role. What she's saying, I must not make retribution and deterrence dominant. And if you look to the top part, where she says, the other purposes, mainly retribution, deterrence, reformation, prevention, are just as important and ought to be properly addressed. If you read the two together, she was just cautioning that when you look at the factors, be careful not to make deterrence and retribution dominant. Treat them the same. She said
Is
that
there no decision of this court which says that in case of serious crimes, retribution must play an important role?
No, but she gives it, but I don't believe that in every case, looking at the facts, that it must be a dominant role. I think that my understanding always of the principles there is, make sure that you properly balance those principles. Don't give one more. In certain cases, of course.
In serious crimes, it must be.
Yes, but you have to look at the facts.
But then it says that in serious crimes, that's looking at the fact. For you to determine whether a crime is serious or not, you must look at the facts.
Yes.
In serious crimes, retribution must also play a very important role.
Yes, but I don't read paragraph 4023 that she waters that down. She just warns about the dominant role of that. That's all she does. And you see, what's so difficult is that, and I say this with great deference, and I want to refer you to a case.
Before you move on, isn't the law that when it comes to serious crimes will require that retribution and deterrence should come to the fore?
Yes, but I
Should
don't...
come to the fore.
Justice Man, but I don't think that can be a blanket fact. I don't think that can be a blanket principle. I think every time that we look at those remarks and that approach, you look at the context of the case. It can never be isolated from the context of the case. Of course it's so. But you have to look at the context and you have to look at all factors. And to criticize with respect Justice Sipa because she worked under intense scrutiny, I really believe that she did very well. And it's in that respect that I want to refer you to a Manisi judgment on one point.
I'm sorry, Advocate. Talking for myself, I'm not criticizing Judge Masipa at all. I'm looking at what has happened, looking at the judgment,
Yes.
and try and bring some sanity to myself.
Yes.
I'm trying to understand exactly what they're saying. And that is not criticizing the judge.
No, Justice Sweet, but I'm just trying to say that if you look at it and you look at the judgment holistically and you look where she was coming from, then I think a lot of things can be justified and you have to look at it and say, what is it that she actually meant? And it's in that sense, if I may just refer you to the Manisi judgment, it is, and I give you the citation, it's not in the heads. The Manisi one is D. Manisi, M-N-I-S-I, versus the state, and the reference is in square brackets 2009, and it comes from Safley, so it's the Z-A-S-C-A. It's 17.
Can you come again with that citation?
It's Z-A-S-C-A. It's in the Supreme Court of Appeal. 17, and I deal with Judge Meyer, she then was with a dissent judgment, but on a different point. But the one point that's instructive is when you go to paragraph 18, she talks about when a judgment was criticized, and she says, regarding the first criticism, it is so that judgments makes no reference to the appellant's clean record and plea of guilty. But this hardly seems to me to justify a conclusion that the magistrate did not consider these factors in determining the sentence. As Davis AJA said some 60 years ago in the quote, no judgment can ever be perfect and all-embracing, and it does not necessarily follow that because something has not been mentioned, therefore it has not been considered. To my mind, it is inconceivable that an experienced judicial officer, such as, in that case, the regional court magistrate, who daily adjudicates criminal cases, would have overlooked such elementary aspects on the sentencing. And I have no doubt that these factors would have weighed in the mind of the presiding officer. Now, what we say here, when you look at the judgment, excuse me, and when you look at it holistically, it is important to determine what weighed in the mind of the court. And there are two things that seriously weighed in the mind. The one was the fact of the aggravation, that he armed himself. She says that 2 places, that he armed himself with a high caliber, with ammunition, that he fired the 4 shots in this limited space. That's in her mind. In her mind as well is, but I have to look in context. And I understand. He was before me. I saw him. I understand what he said to me. Well, I shot out of fear at that moment. I didn't mean that. And whatever. She understood it. She dealt with that. But she says, together with that, I have to look at the person. And then she looked and she repeats. She repeats basically what I've submitted to you on the vulnerability on this person, his situation. And she says, when I look at that and I balance that, then I come to this decision, and I've quoted Vilakazi, and I've quoted Malchus, that I'm of the view that there are substantial and compelling circumstances. And she says that as such, and she lists that now in the sense as stated before. So she doesn't state it again. Now she's through that process. And then she says, but I'm not going to stop there. I've made now finding within my discretion and following Malchus and Vilakazi. That's not limited in the grounds. Now I'm going to see, now that I've found substantial compelling circumstances, what should be the appropriate sentence? And then she starts the process again. And she goes through the aggravation, the mitigation, factors to be taken into account. She even deals with the perception, but in a very different context. She deals with the perception to say, if there's a natural indignation by society, you must be careful. What is the indignation? Is the indignation because you believe A, or is the indignation because you believe B? And she says that when you look at indignation and interest, you have to make sure that it's on the correct facts and not on perceived facts. That's all she was really saying. It's not a misconception of perceptions. She was just saying, when you look at a sentence, when you look at a situation, please don't look at it through a prism of perceptions. Look at it through a prism of facts. And what she then does, and she's mindful, this person was sentenced on culpable homicide. He was sentenced in terms of 2761I. She's now mindful of the following, that there's a change. It is dolus eventualis now. And she says, now I can't impose that sentence. I have now to impose a new sentence. But I have to take into account, and she says that he served time. She knows all these facts. What happened to him at the last moment when his correctional supervision is cancelled. It's all what's happened to him. She takes that into account. I'm sorry if I may just take a sip of water. And she says, I take all that into account. And I believe, because we know it's effective, the state starts off and say, sentence 6 years. The sentence is 6 years. But she says, I believe, taking this into account, that it's an effective sentence of 8 years would be appropriate. But I make it 6 years because he has served now, and we all know about parole, and we all know about the supervision, and she says, that's what I believe is an appropriate sentence. Now, to say in that regard, to say, well, that is such a misdirection, we disagree with respect. You look at the facts, and you say, this man has done something that's terrible, because in the process of firing the 4 shots that he should not have fired, he killed someone that he did not want to kill. It's with him. She says he's going to be tormented.
He killed someone who he did not want to kill. But
Yes.
was he then prepared to kill an intruder?
I think if you look at all the facts, and you look at the fear factor, and you look at the problem, I think many people are, unfortunately, prepared to kill intruders when they feel there's a problem. But what we do know in the context of this, he never wanted to kill him.
Then there's no remorse.
No, but there
Prepared
is.
to kill the, if he's prepared to kill the person inside, irrespective of who it is, then there's no remorse.
Yes, but
Then his remorse argument falls
No,
away
Justice
completely.
Lamont.
Because his intention was to kill the person inside.
no, it was not. It was a dolus eventualis. It was
person
explained.
inside. Dolus eventualis versus whoever was in.
Yes, it was
And
dolus
now he doesn't
eventualis.
care who's in, and he doesn't have any remorse.
But it does.
Well, you just said he's prepared
Now,
to do this.
if I may explain it, how can you have remorse against an intruder that's not real at the end? You know now it's not real. So how do I show humanly remorse to say, well, I just want to tell the court I have great remorse for the intruder? He can't have that, because by the time that we get to sentence, he knows there's no intruder. And his remorse must inevitably be focused on Ms. Steenkamp. And that's what he does. It's unfair, it's illusionary to have remorse as something that not objective possible. Of course he doesn't have remorse.
Can I
because
make a suggestion? In my view, at that stage, after this court has found that he has given various contradictory versions, and he has failed to give an adequate explanation why he shot, when the matter is referred back to the High Court in Chota for rehearing, he should have got into the witness box and tell the court exactly why he shot that person. Because this court had already found that you haven't given us an explanation. And he failed to do that.
If we have to be practical, apart from the fact that his state of mind was given evidence about why he did not give evidence by Professor Scholes.
No, but the trial court rejected that evidence.
No, not that.
That he was not able to, that he needed hospitalization.
No, that's something else. She didn't reject that he was not able to give sensible
No,
evidence.
but if then he wasn't as, she rejected that he was as serious as made out by Professor Scholes.
To be hospitalized.
Yes.
Yes, that's what she rejected, nothing else.
No, but she rejected that he was as serious enough to be hospitalized. So
agree.
why could he not testify?
But we tend then to connect hospitalized with the ability to give evidence.
Yes.
We think, and I disagree with that with respect.
If he is not serious enough to be hospitalized, why did he not testify?
That I don't link hospitalization with a wonderful ability to give evidence. It does not.
If the condition is not serious enough to be hospitalized, why can he not testify?
Well, that's the evidence that he was in that state of mind that he could not do it. If it's rejected as false, I can do nothing about it. I don't believe it is. But let's look at it first. Now we say go into the box. What is he going to say? If he says, I fired the shots because I feared the man is going to coming out and kill me. He's going to cross-examine and say, but previously you said you didn't know why. If he says, I fired the shots because I reacted without knowing. They say, but you lie. Because you have previously said that. It's an impossible situation. There is no way, with respect, that he can go on and survive any of that questions. Because he will simply be taken. It's like a person who's made 4 different statements under oath. Now he goes and says, well, what must he pick? Must he pick now and say, well, let me tell to the court, actually, this whole story that I wanted to kill Ms. Steenkamp, that was true, I wanted to kill her and I have great remorse. That he couldn't do because it's not true. So what
in
must he
other
say?
words, he didn't testify because he was afraid that he's going to be cross-examined.
No,
Can I just finish? About the various versions that he gave to the court. Should we accept that this is what you're saying? That he didn't testify because he gave various versions and was afraid that if he testifies, he will be cross-examined.
No, it is what I submit as a legal representative. I say to myself when I think, because that's the question that I'm confronted with. And I try to answer that question. I think for myself, what would a person, that's not his state of mind. He wouldn't figure this out. How would he get there? But I'm trying to say, what is it that he should have done? As a legal representative standing here today. So with respect, it's unfair, and you don't mean it that way to be unfair, but it would be unfair if I make that statement to say, well, that's what he thought at the time. You must also take into account there was evidence, undisputed, that he was suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and it was on the increase. That's post the conviction. That person, because that's the person that has all these psychological ailments, and that's what Professor Scholes was saying. And it was in fact confirmed in previous evidence by Professor Medal Foster. He's really suffering from severe post-traumatic stress. Now, there's that person with severe post-traumatic stress. He's standing there, and I try to see it for purpose of sentence through his eyes. He's standing there. He's in his mind foremost is, I killed my girlfriend whom I loved and I did not want to kill her. What must I do? I fired the 4 shots. What must I do? He's traumatized. He's tormented. What is it that he could do? Humanly speaking, there's nothing. And with respect then to criticize him, to say, well, A, B, and C, it's taking it out of that context who the person is and what he was suffering from. So it's not only that the difficulties I had before, but it's additional difficulties. And now he stands there, he's a sacrificial lamb. There's nothing that he can do. And to take that focus and to highlight that part in isolation is unfair, and that's why I keep on submitting. Take it holistically, and that's all the trial court did. She looked at it holistically. She was there right from the beginning. She lived through this case. And she says, if I look at this, who's this man in front of me? How is it that I'm going to punish him? If you tell that court that she, knowing everything, was find that there's no compelling and substantial circumstance, he must go to jail for 15 years. In that situation, with what he was suffering from, with that vulnerability, with the pervasive effect, it didn't make sense for her. And that's what she was trying to say. It's simply, and that approach, with respect, Justice Reed, is absolutely consistent with Malgas and with Vilakazi. It's not inconsistent. And I say it's that respect that we must move on and accept with respect that because substantial and compelling circumstances are wide concepts and not narrow concepts, then you look at the appropriate sentence and you see, is that shockingly inappropriate? And our submission to you is that you cannot replace one discretion with another. In her discretion, she mentioned all the factors. She says, I'm doing this balancing. I know of the horrible consequences. I look at the society. I look at the family. She dealt, in fact, if you go through a judgment, there's no need to point it out. She deals with every single aspect. And she exercises a discretion. And we submit that discretion was judicially exercised. It was not a discretion that she simply plucked from the air that is so inappropriate that it is shockingly.
The powers of a court appeal are clearly circumscribed. And the golden thread is that the discretion to decide an appropriate sentence rests with the sentencing court. And hence our powers to interfere are very limited. On the facts of this matter, why would you interfere with the sentence?
I submit, I've made a submission that if you look
I'm
at
sorry
it,
before you go there. Malakas and Vilakasi put up their own standard of when a court of appeal can interfere. The usual epithet, disturbing, inappropriate, disproportionate. Why do you think this court should be able to interfere in this matter?
no, I submit that in this case, that if you look at the discretion, you look at all the factors. And when we come to sentence, it's not only, of course, the main portion goes to the merit. But it's more than that, where she says, look at what's happened to this man. Look what he's lost. Look at a family on the other side. She does that. It's a very careful balancing that she does. She looks at every single factor. I quoted Manisi to say how easy it is to leave something out. But she looks at every single factor. She does that balancing. And she says, I look at this, I look at that. And what is there to say that it was not a proper exercise of discretion? Maybe some court may feel, well, 8 years because it's a fact is not good enough, it should be 10 years or 9 years. But that's not a ground for interference.
But the law says express, we can't do that. It's not what sentence we think we prefer.
But that's the point, and that's the case law that we dealt with, Justice Poseda, to say you don't have free range. And that's why I said now, and I meant well, it may have been misunderstood, Justice Seriti, but I meant well. Justice Masipa, I think she would have asked for this case ever again. She went through a very difficult time. And if you look at the sentencing judgment, she was steadfast, she accepted the decision correctly of the Supreme Court of Appeal. In her discretion, she applied it to the facts, and she balanced the facts, and she comes to a decision, and that should not be interfered with.
Save for the fact that she did not expressly tabulate the factors that she considered, and that are there in the judgment. What is the misdirection?
Yes, well, two
He
things.
dealt with the personal circumstances, he dealt with the nature of the facts, he dealt with public interest in the matter. They're there in the judgment.
Well, two things. One, it's always, of course, better to list, but it's not a rule that you must list. I can tell you about so many judgments when you read it holistically.
That is why I referred to that paragraph where she's actually dealing with them. It's there in there.
Yes, what she says there, she says, I've taken all of the above into consideration. I'm of the view that the mitigating circumstances outweighs the aggravating factors. I find that there's substantial compelling. Her reason was what she says, I look at aggravation, I look at mitigation, she's dealt with it. I did that balancing act. And therefore I found that there's substantial and compelling circumstances. That is absolutely consistent.
So your submission would be leave to appeal should not be granted. There's no reasonable possibility.
I'm coming to that, but if I may make the last submission. What she's done there is actually what was said in Malgas. It's actually what was said in Vilakasi. And then the question is, on what basis should a court interfere with that discretion? Simply replace one discretion with another. I can understand in many cases. I would think, yo, that person gets 6 years. I think I would have given him 8 years. That's an inadmissible process. It is what's calling for a misdirection. What's calling for that absolutely shockingly disproportionate. And we submit there's nothing. And if that's not there, and if it's not sufficiently there, then we submit that leave should be refused. We argue the whole case, of course, for convenience and practicalities, but we believe that it's in view of that a court should be loath, and that's the case law over and over again, should be loath to interfere. You don't replace one discretion for another because it would just become, not a mockery, but it would become, I say, well, I don't think it's good enough, let's move on. There is a matter of certainty.
Well, we
legal
actually
certainty.
are warned as a court of appeal to avoid getting into a situation where we actually erode the discretion of the sentencing court.
And there's a reason for that. And the reason is not only discretion, but there's a great understanding over the years that sentencing court, many things you don't see on a transcript. Many things it's not written down. But you see certain emotions. You see certain feelings. You live with that case. And it tells you in the inside what's right and what's wrong. And you can't always take that inside and write it down. And it's exactly what Vilakasi says. It says you get that, and when you feel it cannot be, it will be an injustice. And that's what the court did. It's that inside that it's not you. Otherwise, judgments would be pages and pages and pages, and every judgment would be criticized for not specifically saying A and B. Holistically seen, we submit that you exercise the discretion judicially, and we say that for purpose of this case, because it's first of all whether leave to appeal should be granted, it should not be granted, because it does not meet the yardstick.
But speaking for myself, as I read the judgment very carefully, I don't get the impression that he found 15 years to be so grossly disproportionate as to amount to injustice.
No.
She was just a little bit uncomfortable with 15 years. That's what came across to me.
Yes,
I don't want to play with words, but
yes.
Vilakazi talks about that feeling being so high, so strong, that it induces some sense of injustice.
Yes, well, it says, if I may read it, and it's in a judgment, where it says, the more a court feels uneasy.
I'm sorry, which page is that?
That's, if I may go to the judgment, page 4016.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the paragraph that we are reading is on which page?
I'm reading there from she quotes the judgment, that's what I'm reading for.
Page?
4016 of Justice Masipa's judgment.
416.
4016.
4016.
Well,
Thank you.
That is Malchus in paragraph 23.
yes, it refers, it's Velakazi referring to Malchus, where it says, the more a court feels uneasy about it, the greater its anxiety will be that it may be perpetrating an injustice. And that once that uneasiness becomes a conviction, then an injustice. And it became a conviction. She was
Then you are entitled to depart from minimum sentences.
Yes. Yes. And that's what she says. She says, I weigh it up, and if you go then, if you go to 4019, she says, I've taken all the above into consideration. I view that mitigating circumstances outweigh the aggravating. That's what she's trying to say. And if you really paraphrase, what does she say? She says, how can I impose the minimum sentence if I come to the finding that there are serious mitigating circumstances? In her view, that's what it was. She took a holistic view. That's a view consistent with the case law. It's not inconsistent. And she's dealt with it. She doesn't repeat it again. What she then does, I think, is correct. She says, well, I go on now, and I deal with the balance of the mitigation. But I've come to that finding. There was a reason why she quoted those specific paragraphs in Vilakazi and Malchus.
Any other further submissions?
May I just approach?
Second.
May I just approach you?
Yeah, second.
Please. There's one point that I think just should also be taken into account. This court in sentencing, she says, what do I have before me? What has happened now to this man? Because the man must be punished, and I know. But what's left of this man? She says, I look at the evidence. It doesn't come just from one person. We have
someone that described him as a broken man.
It's more than that. It's Hartzenberg explains. It's not disputed, not at all. It's Pastor Nell saying that. It is Professor Scholes saying that, and Professor Foster. They say what's left of it's a broken man. Now, of course, that's another factor, and I've left that out. And the court would say, what is going to be achieved? And that's that case then, the Sparks case that we quoted there. It's to say, are we going now beyond the point? He's broken, he's down and out. Let's punish him. And that's a factor that Judge Masipa took into account. She says that. And she says, really, the wheels of justice is turned. It's wrong what's happened. It's terrible. And I think Justice Leach said quite correctly, it's of Shakespearean, I forgot the tragedy.
I had expected you to ask us what a sentence of 15 years would do, which a sentence of 6 years can't do, looking at the papers of punishment.
Yes, but it's not only the 6 years. It's in fact 8 years. But
yeah, the 8 years that
it is because of the deterrence. It can serve no purpose anymore. No? He's gone. He's a man with his severe post-traumatic stress. He's tormented for the rest of his life. He's a broken man. But, and that's the point I was making now, Judge Masipa understood it's not only about the person. I understand that. But I have to go further. There is deterrence, there is retribution. You must be punished. And that's why I increased the sentence. Not from 1 year to 6, but in effect to 8. Because I know there's no purpose. There can't be any purpose. Nothing further can happen. When a man is broken, you don't break him more. But she understood the other principles also. And it's not only because you're broken that I can let you go. Otherwise, you give a suspended sentence. She still sent him, in his condition, to jail for a long time. He sat 1 year, he's gone through a long term of correctional supervision.
Doesn't Judge Nugent address that in Vilakazi?
Yes.
The gradation of the sentence
Yes.
from 10 to life.
Yes. And the court, and all I said, the only submission is that Judge Masipa took that into account. And if she was of the view that being broken is now good enough to walk out, you're scot-free, that would have been wrong. But she understood it's more than that. Although it would serve no purpose, she could not just forget what this has done. The consequences, and a lot of them brought onto himself, but a lot not. Where he was slated, where he wanted to kill his own girlfriend. She knows that. She had to address those perceptions. He was lambasted for things that were really not true. And she took all of it into account. And that's why she dealt with the public perception. To come around to the end and say, all I'm dealing with the public, I show to you. And if I may go to that page, and that would be the last submission there, it's at 4012. If I may refer to 4012, it's about line 8, where she says, she deals with all of this. Society has a right to have certain expectations and to demand justice. However, such expectations must be legitimate expectations before the court can take heed of them. It follows that expectations cannot be legitimate if they are based on wrong perceptions. And that's why she was dealing with it. So I submit, and we submit, that it was a very comprehensive judgment. She took everything into account. And she really exercised her discretion judicially. And in view of that leave to appeal should not be granted. I'm not arguing Dola's directives because it was considered it's not an argument before this court. I've dealt with the moral blameworthiness in the heads of argument. I've set out case law. There's the Ferreira case. Why moral blameworthiness reduced is in itself compelling. And that's the Ferreira case there. And his factors, if you look at him as a whole, that is another factor that was taken into account by Judge Masipa. I don't know if there's anything else, Justice Masipa.
Thank you, Mr. Roux.